The coordinates were perfect. Grid reference 285.347. Obergefreiter Klaus Dietrich adjusted his artillery observer scope, watching the 150 mm shells tear into the Red October factory complex. 12 direct hits on the machine gun nest. Textbook fire mission. The PPSH-41 burp gun opened up from 3 floors higher. Unmöglich, Dietrich whispered into his field telephone. The same distinctive cyclic rate, the same muzzle flash pattern, 700 rounds per minute. The gun had moved overnight. Impossible. September's ammunition expenditure reports painted the madness in numbers. 752,000 artillery shells, 25 million rounds of small arms ammunition, 500,000 anti-tank rounds. Yet the ghosts kept shooting back. Hauptmann Weber studied the morning intelligence summary. His Sturmgeschütz. 3 had pounded Building 47 until the concrete turned to dust. No movement for 6 hours. Then at 03:30, Soviet assault groups emerged from the sewer manholes behind German lines. Half a dozen men with sharpened spades. They moved like smoke. The mathematics didn't compute. Target a cellar. Obliterate it with 88mm fire. Return at dawn to find fresh defensive positions carved into rubble that hadn't existed 12 hours earlier. The Bolsheviks were operating in a 1-kilometer death strip along the Volga's west bank. Physics demanded they should be dead. Lieutenant Hans Krebs watched his spotting round impact through Zeiss optics. Direct hit on the sniper position. The Mosin Nagant rifle tumbled from the window. Problem solved. The rifle cracked from the adjacent building. Same shooter. Same scope glint. Krebs felt ice in his stomach. From the Soviet perspective, the German artillery observer represented death incarnate. Sergeant Mikhail Volkov pressed his face against the basement concrete as the 150mm shells walked closer. 20 meters, 15, 10. The mathematical precision terrified him more than the explosions. These weren't random barrages. Someone was hunting Volkovs. ZIS 3 crew had developed their phantom routine through necessity. Fire 3 rounds from position A. Sprint through the sewers to position B before the counter battery arrived. Let the Germans waste ammunition on empty rooms while setting up position C. The observer couldn't kill what he couldn't find. The psychological effect was calculated. German infantrymen reported shooting Soviet defenders point blank with MP-40 submachine guns, watching them fall, returning later to find the positions manned again. General Hans Dewar noted in his diary, "The Russians surpassed the Germans in their use of terrain and camouflage." Camouflage was survival. The 13th Guards Rifle Division had learned after losing 9,680 men in 24 hours. You couldn't fight German firepower conventionally. You became smoke. You became shadow. You let them expend their 500,000 anti-tank rounds on phantoms. Weber's radio crackled with another fire mission request. Grid 291.452. Machine gun nest. 3rd floor. He'd targeted that building twice this week. Always empty when the smoke cleared. Always manned again by morning. The ammunition reports told the real story. Astronomical expenditure. Minimal effect. The Wehrmacht was shooting at ghosts in a city that refused to die. The trenches at Red October stretched 12 yards apart. Close enough to smell their coffee. Close enough to hear them whisper about home. The Soviets held positions that defied every tactical manual written. Obergefreiter Klaus Brenner crouched behind twisted steel girders. His carabiner, 98K, weighed 4.2 kilograms, but felt like lead in his hands. The barrel was fouled with soot from constant firing. 25 million rounds expended in September alone. The numbers meant nothing when you couldn't hit what wasn't there. Heinrich, you hear that? Brenner whispered to the radio man beside him. Russian voices drifted from the empty assembly hall. The same hall they'd cleared 3 times with Nebelwerfer rockets. The same hall where warm tea still sat in metal cups, but no defenders could be found. The Wehrmacht had pumped 752,000 artillery shells into this sector. The concrete walls bore scorch marks from direct hits, yet the voices continued, singing, laughing, speaking in hushed tones about mothers and wives they'd never see again. Brenner's hand shook as he loaded another 7.92 millimeter cartridge. The Mosin Nagant reports from across no man's land had a distinctive crack, sharp, precise. The Soviet snipers fired through bore sights when their optics shattered. Point-blank accuracy at impossible ranges. From the Soviet trenches, Senior Lieutenant Viktor Petrov watched the Germans through a crack in the rubble. These fascists had no idea what they faced. Petrov's PPSH-41 submachine gun held a 71-round drum magazine. The burp gun could empty its load in seconds, but ammunition was precious. Every round counted when resupply meant crossing the Volga under fire. The Germans moved like frightened children. Their gray uniforms stood out against the blackened concrete like targets at a shooting range. They expected conventional warfare, flanking maneuvers, artillery preparation. They got sewer rats with sharpened spades instead. Petrov had watched his assault team emerge from storm drains behind German positions. 6 men, armed with fish-hooked grenades that snagged on wire nets. The fascists would hear Russian voices from rooms they'd just cleared, because those rooms connected to tunnels they'd never found. The temperature was dropping, -30 Celsius by the thermometer. The Germans weren't prepared for Russian winter. Their equipment froze, their weapons jammed, their resolve cracked like pond ice under boots. "Dmitri," Petrov whispered to his radio man, "tell Chuikov we're ready." The German voices carried across 12 yards of frozen ground. They spoke of home, of warm beds, of anything except the devils in the grain elevator that neither fire nor bullets could touch. Brenner heard movement in the pipes below. The Soviets used the sewer system like highways, half-dozen assault teams appearing where none should exist. His 57th Panzer Corps had 30 serviceable tanks left, 30 machines against ghosts who defied physics and military logic. The voices in the empty rooms grew louder. Russian songs about the Volga, about blood mixed with river water, about men who fought beyond the point considered humanly possible. 12 yards felt like 12 miles when crossing meant facing devils who'd already died but refused to fall. The Wehrmacht machine ground to a halt in the rubble. The doctrine that crushed Poland in 26 days died in Stalingrad's factories. Oberst Wilhelm Adam watched his Sturmgeschütz, 3 assault guns, idle uselessly in the debris-choked streets. The 75mm guns couldn't traverse properly. Rubble jammed the tracks. His panzer doctrine demanded rapid breakthrough and exploitation. Here, his 57th Panzer Corps had 30 serviceable tanks. 30. Against a city that swallowed divisions. The Luftwaffe circled overhead, impotent. Ju-87 Stukas needed clear target identification. Soviet defenders hugged German lines so tightly that bombing risked killing their own men. At the Red October plant, trenches sat 12 yards apart. Any closer air support meant friendly fire. "Herr Oberst, we cannot distinguish enemy positions," radioed Hauptmann Weber from his Henschel HS-129. "The Russians are in our laps." Adam stared through his field glasses. The methodical German way of war required precise timing, artillery preparation, air support, armored advance, infantry exploitation. Each phase depended on the previous. Here, phases blurred into chaos. His artillery observers lost target acquisition constantly. Soviet assault groups of 6 men moved through sewers, appearing behind German lines without warning. The 88-millimeter guns that dominated open battlefields couldn't depress enough for close quarters fighting. 25 million rounds of small arms ammunition expended in September alone. 752,000 artillery shells. The Wehrmacht fired enough ordnance to level Berlin. The city absorbed it all. From the Soviet perspective, watching German confusion became entertainment. Senior Sergeant Viktor Petrov crouched in a basement 30 meters from a German command post. He could hear their radio chatter through the thin walls, panic in their voices, arguments between officers. "They sound like schoolchildren lost in the dark," he whispered to his squad mate. The Germans kept calling for air support that never came effectively. Their precious Stukas circled uselessly overhead, while Soviet soldiers pressed so close that German sentries could smell their Makhorka tobacco. Petrov had watched a full German company spend an hour preparing to assault a building his squad had already abandoned. Their doctrine demanded reconnaissance, planning, coordination. By the time they moved, Soviet defenders had shifted 3 blocks away. "They fight like machines," Petrov observed, "but machines break when you remove their parts." The cold shattered what remained of German precision. Temperatures hit -40 Celsius. Rifle bolts froze. The Mosin Nagant 91/30 rifles still functioned, Russian weapons designed for Russian winters. Adam received his morning briefing. The 13th Guards Rifle Division had lost 90% casualties in 24 hours. Only 320 men remained from 10,000, yet they held their positions. German doctrine assumed rational enemies would retreat when destroyed. These defenders sharpened entrenching spades into axes. They fixed fish hooks to grenades so they'd snag on protective wire nets. The whole war for France was shorter than the fight for one Volga factory, Adam wrote to his wife. The Blitzkrieg was dead. Stalingrad had murdered it with proximity. The Wehrmacht came to Stalingrad with textbooks, grid coordinates, fire control calculations, room-by-room clearance protocols. Chuikov tore up the manual. His 62nd Army developed something the Germans couldn't comprehend. Buildings weren't terrain to hold, they were living things, breathing things. The Red October plant became a circulatory system of rubble tunnels and blown-out staircases. A German squad would rake the second floor of Factory Building 7 with MG-42 fire at 1,200 rounds per minute. Confirmed kills. Blood on concrete. Mission accomplished. 10 minutes later, muzzle flashes erupted from the basement. Same voices, same Soviets. Impossible. The PPS H-41 submachine guns opened up from positions that should have been corpse-filled rooms. The German company commander checked his map, rechecked his coordinates. The mathematics were perfect. The dead were shooting back. Obergefreiter Klaus Weber pressed himself against the rubble, watching his squad leader's head snap back from a Mosin Nagant round. The shot came from Building 15. They'd cleared Building 15 yesterday, burned it with flamethrowers, counted bodies. "They're ghosts," Weber whispered to his loader. "We kill them and they multiply." The loader didn't answer. A sharpened Soviet spade had opened his skull. Weber's mind cracked like ice on the Volga. These weren't soldiers. They were something else. Something that moved through walls, through death itself. Chuikov's doctrine was heretical. Abandon the room under bombardment. Flow through the building's skeleton. Resurface where the enemy least expects. The 76.2 mm ZIS-3 field guns would fire from basement positions, then disappear through blown-out sewage pipes before German counter-battery could respond. "Stay close to the fascists," Chuikov ordered his company commanders. 12 meters maximum. Make their artillery kill them too. At the grain elevator, Soviet defenders perfected the technique. German Sturmgeschütz. 3 assault guns would pulverize the 3rd floor. The defenders melted downward, through debris chutes and ventilation shafts. When the barrage lifted, they reappeared firing from ground-level windows. The Wehrmacht expended 500,000 anti-tank rounds in September alone. Most hit empty rooms. Lieutenant Weber's replacement lasted 3 hours. A Soviet assault group emerged from a drainage tunnel behind German lines. Half a dozen men with PPSH-41 set to full automatic. They appeared like demons from concrete hell. The company's strength dropped from 180 to 47 men in 2 weeks. Weber couldn't sleep. Every shadow moved. Every sound meant death approaching through dimensions his training never covered. Temperature dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius in January. Frostbite claimed fingers in minutes. But the cold couldn't freeze the nightmares. Buildings that ate German squads whole. Soviets who died twice and lived 3 times. A city that fought back with its own malevolent consciousness. Weber wrote his final letter home. His hand shook too badly to finish it. The envelope was found beside his frozen corpse. The basement walls were riddled with PPSH-41 holes. 6 men. PPSH-41 slung tight. The sewers beneath Stalingrad ran deeper than German grid coordinates. Battalion commanders studying maps 3 kilometers back had no idea these concrete arteries existed. Soviet assault groups moved through ankle-deep filth while Sturmgeschütz 3s prowled the streets above. The 76.2 mm ZS-3 crews topside drew attention. Underground, half-dozen teams emerged behind German positions like dead men walking. Senior Lieutenant Kozlov led his group through the main drainage tunnel. The PPSH-41 weighed 3.63 kilograms loaded, too long for sewer fighting. Sharpened excavation spades hung from their belts, 15 centimeters of steel, honed to slice through winter coats and rib cages. Close quarters demanded close weapons. German doctrine never planned for vertical warfare. Soviet defenders moved between floors using holes blown by their own artillery. Each 88 mm shell that punched through apartment walls became a doorway. The enemy's firepower turned into Soviet mobility. Chuikov's men hugged German lines so tight that Dukas couldn't drop ordnance without killing their own infantry. The fishhooks came from factory workshops, welded to RGD-33 hand grenades. Germans stretched wire nets over ground floor windows to catch incoming explosives. Standard grenades bounced off. Fishhook grenades snagged in the mesh and detonated against the barrier. Shrapnel sprayed inward through window frames. Obergefreiter Klaus Weber crouched behind the grain elevator's eastern wall. His carabiner, 98K, held 57.92 mm rounds. The bolt action cycled smooth in September heat, but the sounds from below made his hands shake, scraping metal through concrete, voices speaking Russian in whispered tones. Weber's squad had lost 8 men in 2 days to enemies who appeared from nowhere. Kitchen cellars, bombed-out basements, drainage pipes. The Ivans moved like spirits through a city that should have been corpses and rubble. Weber checked his ammunition pouches, 40 rounds remaining. His company had started the week with 180 men. 37 answered morning roll call. The grain elevator held Soviet defenders who absorbed direct hits from Panzerfaust and kept firing. Weber's platoon leader called them devils. Weber thought devils would show mercy compared to these men who fought with sharpened tools and improvised explosives. Every shadow could hide a sewer entrance. Every basement could connect to underground networks. The Soviets had turned Stalingrad's destruction into their advantage, while German forces remained trapped on surface streets where T-34s picked them apart with 76.2 millimeter guns. The PTRS-41 anti-tank rifle fired 14.5 millimeter rounds, single shot, bolt action. The recoil broke shoulders. Soviet marksmen used them against German infantry through apartment windows. One shot turned a man into red mist and shattered bone. Temperature dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius in January. Frostbite claimed fingers in minutes. Gangrene followed. German medical stations filled with men whose weapons froze solid. Soviet forces stayed warm in basement positions, while Wehrmacht troops held exposed positions in streets and squares. The sewers flowed beneath artillery coordinates. Maps meant nothing underground. The bullets stopped working in October. German machine gunners fed belt after belt through their MG-42s, 700 rounds per minute. The barrels glowed cherry red. The defenders kept coming. At the Red October plant, Obergefreiter Klaus Müller pressed his eye to the scope of his carabiner 98K 12 yards. The Russian was 12 yards away, close enough to see his blackened teeth. "They're not human anymore," Müller whispered to his squad leader. "Fire doesn't stop them. Steel doesn't stop them." The squad leader said nothing. He'd seen a Soviet woman at the anti-aircraft regiment take a 7.92 millimeter Mauser round through the shoulder and keep working her gun. The 88 millimeter shells kept coming. German tanks burned like torches. 25 million rounds of small arms ammunition, gone in September alone. The 57th Panzer Corps was down to 30 serviceable tanks. The math was simple. Unstoppable force meets immovable object. The object was winning. Major Friedrich Kellner crouched in what used to be a factory office. His radio crackled. "Kellner, this is battalion. Status report. We took the first floor yesterday. Lost it this morning. Russians came up through the sewers. 6 men. Half a dozen men cleared out an entire company." "Impossible." "Tell that to Hoffman's platoon. They're decorating the stairwell." The temperature hit minus 30. Frostbite claimed more Germans than Soviet bullets. Kellner's men wrapped their feet in newspaper. The Russians seemed immune to cold. They moved through the rubble like ghosts. From the Soviet bunker, Senior Lieutenant Anatoly Kozlov watched the Germans through his periscope. They stumbled. They fell. They called for their mothers in languages he didn't understand. "The fascists thought we'd break," he told his radio man. "They conquered France in 6 weeks. Now they've been here 6 months fighting over one factory." His men had sharpened their entrenching spades. Close quarters work. The PPSH-41 submachine gun was reliable, but ammunition ran low. Blades never jammed. The Germans tried everything. Junker's Ju-87 Stukas screamed overhead, 500-pound bombs. The rubble absorbed the impact. More hiding places. The city regenerated faster than they could destroy it. Kellner read the letter again. His company commander's words. The whole war for France was shorter than the fight for one Volga factory. The truth settled in his stomach like cold metal. They weren't fighting an army. They were fighting the city itself. Every pile of brick concealed a sniper. Every basement hid a mortar team. The defenders had become part of the landscape. At 03:30 hours, the artillery preparation began. Nebelwerfer rockets shrieked across the frozen air. The barrage lifted. Kellner's men advanced. The Russians were waiting. They were always waiting. The bullets still didn't work. The ammunition figures told the story. 25 million small arms rounds in September alone, 500,000 anti-tank rounds, 752,000 artillery shells. The Wehrmacht was burning through its reserves like kindling. General Hans Doer stared at the reports from his command bunker. The Russians surpassed the Germans in their use of the terrain and in camouflage. His voice carried the weight of a doctrine dying. At the Red October plant, German trenches sat 12 yards from Soviet lines. 12 yards. The Luftwaffe couldn't drop ordnance. The 88-millimeter guns couldn't find targets. Everything the Wehrmacht had learned about combined arms warfare meant nothing here. The 71-millimeter Nebelwerfer batteries fired at 0330 hours on September 10th. Standard barrage pattern. Die Sturmgeschütz, 3 assault guns followed protocol, advancing in formation. The Soviet 76.2mm ZIS-3 field guns waited until the German armor closed to 50 meters. Point-blank range through the bore barrels. No gun sights. Pure geometry. From the rubble of a collapsed apartment block, Obergefreiter Klaus Brenner watched Soviet assault groups emerge from manholes behind his position. 6 men. PPSH-41 submachine guns. The burp gun's distinctive rattle filled the air as his squad was cut down from behind. These weren't soldiers anymore. They were ghosts, devils who moved through sewers and appeared in basements. His Moser, K-98K, felt useless in his frozen hands. The bolt action mechanism jammed in the minus 30 degrees Celsius cold. Frostbite had taken 2 fingers. The Russians seemed immune to the weather. They sharpened their excavation spades and used them like medieval axes. Brenner had seen Wehrmacht doctrine manuals. None mentioned fighting trench raiders who fixed fish hooks to grenades. The wire. Nets over windows meant nothing when Soviet grenades snagged and detonated anyway. This wasn't warfare. This was madness with military ranks. The 57th Panzer Corps counted 30 serviceable tanks. 30. From an entire armored corps. Romanian forces pleaded for anti-tank guns that never came. They faced T-34s with cavalry lances, literally. The Italian units fared worse. Friedrich Paulus knew the truth. I know, and I also know that history already has condemned me. His 6th Army was trapped in a 1-kilometer strip along the Volga's west bank. The creeping defense had worked. Soviet forces stayed close enough to German lines that artillery became suicide. The Luftwaffe flew blind. The captured German generals sat in their clean uniforms, all their decorations intact. Peacocks in a henyard, fat and sleek while their armies froze, while their men ate horse meat and fought with sharpened spades. The whole war for France was shorter than the fight for one Volga factory. The letter never reached home, neither did its author. Urban warfare had been born in these ruins. The Wehrmacht's tactical superiority meant nothing when trenches sat 12 yards apart, when sewer systems became highways, when excavation tools became weapons of choice. Military science was obsolete. The doctrine was dead. What emerged from Stalingrad would haunt German forces until Berlin fell. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe for more World War II historical deep dives every week. Thanks for watching.